Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have been repeatedly told in Tennessee that our state does a great job of maintaining election integrity and that we are number one. But by what standard are we number one? What are they looking at when they make that claim? Are our elections as secure as they make them sound? Are there things not included in that evaluation that would provide a better metric for election integrity? What can we improve on, add, or change altogether? Tonight we will talk about election integrity in Tennessee and legislation intended to improve it and discuss the opposition to making those changes. Kathy Harms and Aundrea Gomez join us tonight with Tennessee Fair Elections to discuss this hot topic. But first, it's time for the Informer Report. The Trump administration discussed additional sanctions for Russia due to the situation in Ukraine, but they're talking about making a deal with China. Now, we can't trust China, and I don't quite understand why we're putting sanctions on Russia over Ukraine. It's not our fight. No matter what, it's not our fight. He seemed to understand this before he got back in office. When Biden was messing everything up, he seemed to understand that, but now 10 months later, and we're still playing this game. We cannot police the world. It's not our place, and we should have long ago ended this. Trump on track to smash records for deportations of illegal aliens, which is a good thing. He is certainly trying to fulfill that promise. I also heard something earlier today that the UN will no longer have any say in our refugee program. They never should have. I hope that holds true because they definitely send some of the worst over here. Our national debt is now $38 trillion. It was $37 trillion in August. This is dangerous. And let's not forget here in Tennessee that the D.C. duo of Blackburn and Rose have been part of this deficit spending since they've been there. It's inexcusable for Rose, who wants to tout his business experience as his qualification for governor. While he was no doubt a successful businessman, he apparently hasn't translated that thought into more than lip service when it concerns taxpayer dollars. No reason to think it would be any different at the state level. Remember on this show back in May, he made the comment about our state government being frugal. If he thinks a 59% increase in spending in 6 years is frugal, then I hate to see what he would do as governor. Marcia has gotten to she got to D.C. when the deficit was $374 billion. Now that's just the deficit, and the debt was around $6.7 trillion. Now it's $38 trillion, and the deficit is $1.8 trillion. So she certainly has some debt-stained hands. John Rose on this show in May said he supported nullification. However, last week at an event, after laying out a very good case that the federal government was out of control and greatly exceeding its authority, he called nullification anarchy, or words to that effect. He pointed to the situation in California over immigration. But California and other states, including Tennessee, have been ignoring federal immigration law for years. As a lawyer, he knows that the non-commandeering law means no state has to use the resources to enforce federal law or policy. They shouldn't interfere. But what if the issue were gun confiscation? What about states that resisted the fugitive slave laws prior to the Civil War? I believe he changed his position because somebody told him to. Just another weak man without convictions. SNAP will not be funded after November 1st if the shutdown hasn't ended. This will impact Tennessee, and I heard that we're not going to use our rainy day fund. I'm not sure why we have a rainy day fund if we're not going to use the rainy day fund, but okay. Feeding the poor is not a federal responsibility anyway. So maybe Tennessee will find other ways to take care of this problem. Maybe cut some other BS programs that we fund, or maybe rely on churches and charities more. If we can fund Titan Stadium and Ford, then maybe we can feed our own people. I would think that would be the better way to do it. Maybe we need to weed out those that just won't work. What a concept. Marcia's video on drug money. You got to see this.
Stark with American Bridge. I wanted to talk about the $700,000 you've taken from opioid companies. Is opioid abuse a very big deal is it a big deal in Tennessee? As senator, $700,000 from opioid companies? Do you think that's a problem for your election? Do you think it's a problem for people in Tennessee? Look, how many people are dying every year in Tennessee from opioids? Do you even know? Do you care? Is it on your radar, or is the $700,000 you've taken from opioid manufacturers on your radar? Which do you care more about, the $700,000 or the thousands of people dying from opioid abuse? You're just going to ignore this question?
Thanks for your time, sir.
Well, thank you, guys.
Wow. Now, that was from Mike Stark. I don't know his organization. I don't know if it's left wing, right wing, but I'll tell you what, is this woman arrogant or what? Did you see that smirk on her face? It's like, I don't have to answer you. I don't have to answer to the public. Anyway, arrogant, entitled, and she wants to be governor. Just remember her D's. Her D's are debt, deficit, donations from drug companies, deafening silence on the Second Amendment, especially the Hughes versus Lee decision, her decision to certify for Biden despite saying she wouldn't, and the diluted RNC provisions concerning marriage and life that she led the charge on. That wraps up this installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at tninformer.tv@gmail.com. And now to our guests, Kathy Harms and Aundrea Gomez of Tennessee Fair Elections. Thank you for being with us. How are you doing tonight?
Hi, Dave. I'm well. Hi, Dave. Thank you.
Appreciate you coming on the show. Let's get started. What parameters were used to determine that Tennessee is number one in election integrity?
Well, Dave, that was a scorecard that's been talked a lot about. It was done by Heritage Action, and it roughly looks at 6 different categories, not too much in depth, some of which we could say we, on the surface, do, but there's a lot more to it, and then a lot that is not being done. But on those surface levels, I think probably the one key that we do well, probably better than many, many states, is we control our absentee by mail voting. And that is probably our single greatest success story in the state of Tennessee, that we have never succumbed to the no excuse mail-in absentee. But on the other side of it, there's a lot of other categories that Aundrea and I have looked at and that have been examined nationally, where we are a bit in the scales and wanting. We need to do a little bit of work.
Yeah. So what are some of those other issues?
Well, technology is one of those issues that is not at all discussed in that scorecard. And that goes to the heart of where a lot of angst in elections comes from, which is transparency. People want to know that their ballot is there, and not just voter verified, but voter verifiable, meaning that after an election, there's actually a piece of paper that they completed themselves that says and marks what their choices were, so that we can do proper audits. So technology has never been a part of that scorecard, and it is something that you hear about it everywhere. I think if you ever asked anyone on the street what their number one concern is, it is technology and transparency. So that's number one right there.
So the Heritage Scorecard has nothing on there about technology. And like you said, technology is one of the things that scares everybody in reference to voting. That's kind of hard to believe. I mean, that just on the face of it would kind of make it, a weak metric, I would think.
Well, as I said, it does deal with things like ballot harvesting and absentee voting, which kind of go hand in hand, which is good. But then it's surface on things like voter ID and citizenship and voter registration. And in those areas, when you really start digging and scratch below the surface, you can see that even though that metric was designed a while back, there are a lot of things that have happened over the last 5 years that have given people pause, open borders for one.
So now I know you guys are going to have some training coming up, I think November 11th, and it talks about a Bill of Rights for voters. And maybe I think maybe talking about that will kind of cover some of the things that we're not doing that we need to do.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. We could really replace the current scorecard that's being used as a measure and replace it with this U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights. And just to be clear, this is a Bill of Rights that lays out the gold standard of what every state should be seeking to have to secure the elections in their state. So this isn't an actual piece of legislation. This is really the new measuring stick, right?
Right.
And it covers 10 specific articles. And we're not going to go through all of those 10 articles here today. That's what the training on November 11th is for. We can hit on a couple of them. But what I think is also really important to highlight is that this U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights is supported by, backed up by, a poll that was done of voters and what voters want and what voters are prioritizing. We already know in Tennessee that election integrity is the top, if not the top, it's at least in one of the top three issues that people are concerned about. It's important to them. And that importance hasn't gone away. It's only grown stronger. And so, which is why it's so concerning when we are talking about vulnerabilities in Tennessee, why we are always met with this narrative that is so well protected that we're number one. Well, we've looked at the vulnerabilities, and the people across Tennessee and across this country are still saying there's more work to be done. So you've got the Rasmussen numbers up there right now. Those are strong numbers for polling. When you get above 70%, you might as well have 100%, because 70% supporting requiring regularly cleaning the voter rolls. And I can't quite see all of those numbers right there. It's very tiny for me on this end, but
Yeah, it's not a lot bigger on this end.
so you can see that those numbers are strong in what the voters across the country are asking for. And so that slide that you had up right there just shows the 10 articles of that U.S. Citizens Bill of Rights. And we can talk about a couple of those if you'd like. We're going to go through all 10 at our training that we're holding on Zoom on November 11th. But there's two real main issues. Kathy hit on one being the technology, and the other one with the border situation during the previous administration, and the amount of people that are here that are non-citizens. That's created quite a concern of how many of them are registering to vote and how many of them are actually voting in our elections.
Now, in Tennessee, we do have something on the driver's license that indicates that they're not a citizen and they're not supposed to vote if they're not a citizen. But do the poll workers know what to look for on the license? Is it something that's easy to pick up on? And I thought we had legislation proposed to improve that or make it bigger or do something. What's the story on that?
Well, a few years ago, we discovered that on our driver's license in the state of Tennessee, to get a driver's license, you have to prove that you're here legally. You have to prove something. And so you're going to find out whether they're a citizen or not. And if they're not a citizen, it says temporary across the top of a driver's license. And nobody knew to check that. And actually, it was Jody Barrett that brought forward legislation to say, this is a no-brainer. We should be either making that even more bold, or we should be talking about it. We should have a conversation about this, because our voter ID today, which is one of the top scores we get in Heritage, is where it's weak is that nobody checks anything but the face. The face that's on that picture matches the face in front of them instead of looking. And then there was also another problem, because some people are here legally and they're here permanently, but their driver's license looks just like yours and mine. So for the last couple of years, we've been trying to get a little bit more action on that, just to say, can we just at least advance the look of this driver's license, or at least the ones that we do have, have the poll workers check it. And I understand that in the special session last year, legislation was put forward to do more with that through the Department of Safety. However, that doesn't even go into effect until 2028, where today, even right now, we can be checking that. And so legislation was passed that Representative Hill brought forward in the last session that said, effective in January, poll workers need to be trained to look at that voter ID for more than just the face. And if it says temporary, there needs to be a policy of how to handle that at the polls. And that puts a burden on the poll worker. However, that burden is nothing compared to whether or not a non-citizen is voting.
That's what they're there for. I mean, burden, that's their responsibility. So, but they can't do that until 2028?
They could do that. They could have done that 2 years ago. It didn't require legislation. It would have just required a policy or a rulemaking through the government operations, because the data is on that driver's license. It's there, at least in this form that it is right now. But we couldn't get anybody to tell poll workers what to do with it. And so we're going to advance more legislation, hopefully in January, that revamps our voter ID, because another problem with our voter ID is it can be expired. There are many forms, and we're not checking it also for residency. It should be used for residency. So we should not be using any form of ID or accepting it unless it can be validated as a form that has been issued with documented proof of citizenship. And if it hasn't, that person should only be eligible to vote provisionally and be able to come in and show that they are, whether or not they are a citizen. So we need to do a few things, and we need to firm that up a lot more. And so we're looking at legislation for 2026 to do that.
So what opposition have you got in the past on the bills you tried to get through for election integrity?
Quite a bit. A lot of the pushback has been, we don't need it, that, we're number one. I think there's a lot of confusion about what number one means. Number one means that it should be that we are doing everything we can. And if we have found a loophole, we should, that can put a damper on election integrity, we should close it. And so we've brought several things forward. Getting back to citizenship, we had help from Heather Honey, who is now the Assistant Deputy of Department of Homeland Security for Election Integrity. She helped us draft a bill because uniformed overseas voter, it's called UOCAVA. Everybody thinks that's military, but what people didn't realize, 60% of those voters are now overseas citizens. And of course, the other side has been encouraging anybody living overseas to apply for a ballot, and there was no requirement for proof of citizenship. And so we put a lot of safeguards into that, but a big, huge fiscal note was attached to it, so it never even saw the light of day.
How would you imagine that you're going to allow somebody from overseas who claims to be a citizen and not have some sort of verification system? That doesn't make sense that you would even consider doing that.
Well, it's worse than that. Do you want me to give you the second
yeah.
shoe that drops?
Yeah.
Some of these people never have had to live in the state of Tennessee. They just have to have had a parent who hasn't had an address. I mean, the law is pretty loose. There are only 12 states that require people who vote in your local elections to have lived in that town. And so that was one of the other loopholes we tried to close. We tried to say, if they've never lived in the state of Tennessee, should they be voting for our county commissioners, our school board members, our sheriff? Instead, they should only get a federal ballot. And so we are hoping to do that again, part of the bill that we couldn't get passed last year, because that is now a national policy that we're putting forward.
So who's the opposition? I mean, we got a Republican supermajority. Who in our not so super majority is opposing you?
I would say there's just a lack of curiosity and a lack of will to dig into the particulars, to look beyond what they're being told. There is a very heavily protected narrative in Tennessee, and our legislators are all too willing to just accept and embrace that narrative and they don't seem to have the curiosity to want to actually dig into it any further. And like Kathy was saying earlier with the scorecard, it's really just looking at a handful of laws on the books. That scorecard isn't looking at the processes that are being followed in our state. And it's also not looking at what laws are being enforced. In Tennessee, we don't have a lot of enforcement. There's not a lot of teeth in our legislation
Right.
here in Tennessee. But if you're told by someone in, a state bureaucrat that everything's fine, and then you can move on and look at other things, that's less work for the legislator, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, after 2020, I'm surprised anybody accepts that answer. When were we deemed number one? I'm just curious.
I didn't quite hear you. It was a
When
little
when did they
muffled.
tell us you're number one? When did Heritage say Tennessee's number one?
Right after they made Georgia number one. Georgia
Holy
was number one.
Good Lord.
Yeah, well, this year we actually tied with Arkansas. We actually came in second, but I think there were, somehow we ended up tied with Arkansas. So, but again, it's the metrics. And, Heritage has a lot of great policies. They do a lot of great things. But look, and they've also tried to help us, to be honest with you, to get some of this legislation passed. We try to do better list roll maintenance, making sure that once somebody's on the voter rolls, that we're cleaning them up, that we don't have a lot of dead people or people that moved out of state. And so they have tried, and we've had their support, but we haven't always been able to take it across the finish line.
Now, as far as cleaning up the rolls, how big of a problem is that across the state?
Well, there's two parts to that question. Number one is how often are they cleaning the voter rolls? And the second part is, are they doing it? And what we have found is that because there's federal laws, you do hit a glass ceiling where you can only do certain things because you have federal laws you have to follow. So you can't do voter list maintenance or clean up your voter rolls 90 days before an election. Now, April 15th is the first day of early voting next year. So they have to be cleaned up by January 15th, right? We passed a law in the state of Tennessee last year where they added another caveat to help encourage them to clean up the voter rolls and said, in that law, it was signed on April 16th of 2025, I believe, it said you have to use the same standard that you use if you get a national change of address. Not everybody fills that form out anymore, so people move and nobody knows it. But if they haven't voted in 2 federal elections, they need to put them on inactive and send out a card. Now, the question is becoming, are they going to do it before this election cycle? Because some counties, it has really jumped how many people would move to inactive. One county that I won't mention may have up to half of their voter rolls would go to inactive if they did it. And I think that the pressure in these election offices to get people registered and to do other things sometimes doesn't focus them on getting this done because we're hearing we don't have time, we're not going to be able to do it, it costs too much. And I think that it should be priority number one, that before we go into the next election cycle, every single voter that shouldn't be on that voter roll or should be moved to an inactive status is done before January 15th, before the first day of early voting is April 15th.
Wow, that's a tall order. So, what federal laws? Why would the federal government have any say on us cleaning up our rolls?
Well, in the 1990s, a law was passed called the National Voter Registration Act, and it was, rolled in after all the civil rights and all of that kind of thing, thinking that protecting people that are not, so that we don't remove people indiscriminately from the voter rolls. And I can understand that. And it isn't even, and we would love to see that changed. And we work with a national organization called the Election Integrity Network, who actually put that Bill of Rights together. There are roughly 30 states that have a coalition with the Election Integrity Network, and they're the ones that had the input on what that Bill of Rights should look like. So they're working, there are people at a higher level than me and higher level than Aundrea working on those federal laws, but because we know what they are, We've known what they are for a long time. We should have processes and systems in place where we can check these things and put a priority on them, because right now it's difficult if we don't do that.
So when somebody moves from another state to Tennessee, is there a certain amount of time obviously they have to change all their addresses and all, but is there a certain amount of time they have to live here before they're legally allowed to vote in state or county races?
Well, they have to just register to vote, and that's the critical thing. And they have to register 30 days before an election. It's not like running for an office where we have, residency issues. But some of these residents that are in the state of Tennessee, we found, I think it's thousands of people that are registered at student unions on college campuses. And that's where things get wonky. We tried to pull that in last year and say, if a student union is not a permanent address. We have a definition for a residence, and we don't think a student union should be it, especially when the average age is over the age of 25 that are registered there. And we have, I think, a 90-year-old registered on a student campus it's kind of in libraries, student unions. And we came across this accidentally because we had citizens that were working to help clean up the voter rolls. We're working with a data system that was developed in Michigan called Check My Vote. The man who designed that has helped enormously help the clerks in the state of Michigan clean up their voter rolls. So we thought, well, he's allowed us to use that same, he loads our voter rolls. The problem is, back to transparency, it cost a citizen to get the state voter rolls $2,400 a month. And we're not a 501c3, we're all volunteers. And so that puts an enormous burden. We would love to be able to come alongside and help the clerks, and we are doing that. We had a generous donor that paid for them for July, and a donor that paid for them last year. But $2,400 is at the discretion of the Secretary of State, and we need him to bring that down. We're one of the highest in the nation. Ohio, it's free. In Ohio, they put them on their website, actually. And if we had the voter rolls, we could really help. We've got volunteers across the state that have been looking at the voter rolls, finding duplicates, helping them get potentially deceased people off the voter rolls, and do what you said, look at residency, people who may have moved. And you know what, the clerks appreciate it because they could use the help, and we're more than happy to give them the data and let them check it out for themselves because it's the state data. We're not making it up. But to get access to that state data is very prohibitive in a cost.
What is the Secretary of State's justification for charging $2,400 for something that should be public record?
Well, it not only should be by law, it is a public record. It's just when you make the bar so high to obtain it, that's where it gets tricky. We have had volunteers ask for that to be reduced. It is in the purview of the Secretary of State to do so. He can use reasonable, charge you something reasonable. But that was back, I think the last time that was updated was in 2014. Technology has come a long way. They're not handwriting this.
Right.
These are records that they already have that they could just give to a person or put it on their website. Do what Ohio does. Michigan, it's pretty inexpensive. I think Virginia is the only one that's high like we are. There's a few, but a lot of them are free or very, very minimal cost. And that would be so helpful to everybody because you would increase confidence. That's the whole thing here. The confidence level of the American people have dropped tremendously after 2020. Let's do whatever we can to get people to the polls. We want to increase our voter turnout. We think if we had transparency in our systems, if we had transparency about our voter rolls, people would cast a ballot. It was proven in Georgia when they said when they went to voter ID that it would disenfranchise. Nope, it was the opposite. Turnout increased. We want to see more people voting in the state of Tennessee.
I want to see more educated voters voting. I don't necessarily want to see more people voting, but I get your point.
Well, eligible anyway.
Yeah. Well, so we do have some strong points, but we've got a lot of weak points. And the Bill of Rights that you're mentioning is not going to be one single piece of legislation. I know that we want to save as much of this as possible for the Zoom meeting that you're going to have on the 11th. But hit a few of the high points, if you could, on some key things that people need to know that we need to get done, hopefully in this session. Well, in this session, because 26 is an election year.
Well, how about we highlight one of the things that President Trump wants to accomplish?
Yes.
So this U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights not only reflects the will of the people, it reflects the will of the president. And one of the things that was in his executive order back in that came out in February of this year was to remove the QR code or barcode from our ballots, because you and I don't speak barcode or QR code. We cannot verify. So when you go in and you use a ballot marking device or a DRE, and you're making your selections, what they're telling you that they're using a paper ballot, but those systems are a little bit different in how they do that. But what the tabulator is reading is not what the words are that are printed on that paper. The tabulator is reading either the QR code or the barcode. And so that's when it goes back to what Kathy was saying earlier, is that our ballots are not voter verifiable. You cannot verify that what that barcode says is that it matches what your selections were. And we can't get into the machines and look at the software that they're running on or any of those things. So this is one of the things that President Trump has called for: returning to a secure hand-marked paper ballot with no QR or barcode. And I think from the polling, I think it's 59% of the individuals that were polled. It wasn't one of the strongest numbers, but it was still quite strong.
Very good, yes.
Yes, and that's really what we've heard from people since 2020. This is one of the most obvious concerns that people have about our elections, that we feel like there's a lack of transparency there. And then we don't actually have a hand-marked paper ballot that we could go back to do a good audit for. So I think Trump is on the right path in calling for those QR codes and barcodes to be removed from our ballots. And while we continue to articulate our desire to return to the secure hand-marked paper ballot, we are repeatedly shut down and told no. Our Secretary of State has reiterated that just recently. He would not support returning to a secure hand-marked paper ballot. Now, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we do not need legislation. The counties can do this. We have the laws currently on the books that allow the counties to, go to a vendor and order the paper ballots. They can be watermarked. They can be
I think Benton County does that.
For.
I think Benton County may be the only county in Tennessee that does that. Murray
County did it for 2024.
Oh, well, good. Mm-hmm. So the counties could do it. The Secretary of State doesn't support it, but we don't really need to support. The counties need to take it upon themselves to do this, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, the law is on the books, and it can be done. And to Aundrea's point, people don't want to just run ballots back through the machine. That's not telling them anything. And they don't care if it's a different machine, because they don't know how those machines are programmed.
Right.
A good audit would be hand counting the paper ballots.
Yep.
And that would be an audit. So what would be a good thing? In person. This is what we call VIP voting. Voting in person, in precincts, on paper. Simple.
Yep.
And that Election Bill of Rights says, go back to your precincts, get off of these electronic poll books, fill out your own ballot, and get your original result from a tabulator, but do your audits based on that hand count of that paper. And when you have small precincts and you're voting that way, very doable. And it's on the books of how to even do that. We already have those laws. Nobody ever erased them.
And we really don't need to have an election month. We really need to have an election day, at the most election, maybe a week. I think that's too much. I think we can do it all in a day, 2 at the most.
Well, The Election Integrity Network is taking a model policy to ALEC, which is the American Legislative Executive Council that meets in Dallas in December. And they put together a model policy to say no more election season. And they talked to legislators in several states, and they came up with maximum 8 days of early voting, maximum in person, in precincts, excuse only absentee like we have, greater protection for the vulnerable like nursing homes, and voter ID, they must be able to prove citizenship. So to your point, you are absolutely right. We do not need 20 days of early voting. It confuses people, and that's, I think, another reason we have lower voter turnout. They don't know when to vote. I get calls all the time about when is the election? We need to, that is a Trump agenda item. He wanted only election day. We got a lot of blowback. Yeah, I think that's going to be that's a political hill I don't think anybody's ready to die on yet. But at least limiting it to a maximum of 8 days makes a lot of sense. And there's always the emergency. You can get an emergency absentee ballot if you had a death in the family or an illness.
Right.
That is very doable.
Yeah. So the legislature seems to want to hang on to what Heritage has said. And you said Heritage did try to help you guys. Have they? Are they going to update their standards? I mean, if they're helping you, that's kind of admitting, yeah, our number one doesn't mean what everybody thinks it means. So, is there any indication they may actually come out with better standards themselves?
I don't know if the metric will change, but I can tell you this. They have policies that they've put together for this coming year, very similar to what we're doing. And so I'm very happy about that. I've looked at their absentee policy. They do want to get rid of the third-party influence in our election offices, which we have here in the state of Tennessee, which is very disturbing. We don't want George Soros, or we don't want Mark Elias. We don't want some of these Pierre Omidyar in our election offices and influencing our workers.
Yeah, can you explain that? Because some of the audience may not know what that's about.
There are nonprofits that are currently they have conferences. They have, you can become a member, like the election group or the election center. They have conferences all over the country, and they invite speakers, but they're never a conservative speaker. Let's put it that way. And so they will be telling them, right after 2020, the threat, there's such a threat level that, these poor election workers we did a study, no threats. So they tone it down, but they are always pushing. They even want to go to internet voting. They put convenience and access over security.
Right.
And that's what they push. And then that gets into the heads, it's a repeated thing. And so we hear this all the time, convenience. We hear accessibility, but we're not hearing what's the takeaway from that? What's the security? So another piece of good news, a piece of legislation that got passed last year, was almost a one-liner that said no ballot will be tabulated that is returned via the internet, because we are terrified of the next step that is going to be, let's get on our cell phone and just let anybody vote. Well, you can't have a secure election if you're allowing ballots back. So that was something very good that got passed. So, in the end, we don't want to say that everything Tennessee does is wrong, because that's not true. We do have good things, and we're better than many states. But these are vulnerabilities change. And to your question about Heritage, I hope they do change the metrics, because their policies reflect what we're saying, but the metrics need to be updated possibly.
Right. So the politicians don't have something to hide behind of, hey, well, Heritage said we're number one, so it's got to be true. Now, the machine companies, I know a couple years ago there was some legislation, and I can't remember the specifics of what they were trying to do, but I know that they have lobbyists in Nashville, and I'm sure they have them in every other capital, that really push against, doing away with machines, or doing away with, the hand-marked ballot. And they've got quite a bit of power, don't they? Quite a bit of influence?
There's a lot of money wrapped up in those machines. It's a $1 billion industry, and they're not going to walk away from it. And in 2021, when we had the debacle in Williamson County called the Williamson Air that everybody got involved with, nobody could find out the problem, but they said it was fixed. So we got rid of Dominion in the state of Tennessee, but we brought in its kissing cousin, ES&S. So it's just, different name, different company, but it's still vulnerable. So to get rid of those things and go to a hand-marked paper ballot's a vulnerability. And you just heard Dominion got purchased by a supposed conservative. But this guy is the owner of a e-poll book company called Knowink, Knowinc rather. And it's had its fair share of problems of being hacked and the possibilities. That's all connected to the internet. So you're right. It's an uphill battle whenever you are dealing with a lobbyist. We're volunteers.
Right.
You've been up to Cordell Hall during session.
Yep.
Those are paid lobbyists mostly.
So this upcoming session, have you figured out all the bills you're going to run, and do you have sponsors yet?
Well,
I know it's early.
It's early. We have sponsors for a few. We want to improve our voter ID. We we really want to get this UACAVA, the overseas, tightened up, because that's a real concern when you have more and more. When you have somebody call you up from Italy, you have no idea to validate them. And we do want to go back to a secure hand-marked paper ballot as a policy. And we've tried several times. But more important than that, to get there, we want to return to get rid of the vote centers. We've been rolling those out little by little. They're centralizing the operation. That's what the problem in Wisconsin was, centralized tabulation centers. Same problem in Colorado, Arizona. We don't want those, so we want to return to precinct voting on paper and using poll books that are not networked at all. Right. So if we get there, that would be a big plus, just to get rid of the vote centers, because there's no process that we see in the law to get out of them. You have to have a 2/3 majority of your election commission, which means you have to have 4 votes. Well,
to get rid of
to get them in.
Oh.
There's nothing in the law that says how do you get them out, and I don't see the other side throwing that 4th vote to take them out. So we would have to do that legislatively to come up with a policy, and we highly recommend we go back to precincts. That's the direction that the country wants to go. That's the direction that we're going to get our paper ballot back. That's the direction that's going to bring us the most security and transparency. So vote centers, we're hoping to roll those, to make those things a thing of the past.
Now, I'm assuming pretty much every, well, actually during early voting, that's what every county uses during the early voting. And then some, as I understand it, some counties have it, during regular voting. I don't know if every county does or not. Well, no, I know every county doesn't, but I don't know how many counties do, especially of the bigger ones, like in metro areas. I don't know how many of those have vote centers on election day versus precincts.
But when you've got 60 to 80% of your vote happening early, you're all in vote centers, basically.
Yeah.
We got to go back to precincts. And if we have limited early voting, the cost is less. You can control it. You don't have, because they'll say, oh, you can't man all these precincts. Our policy says if you have to, you can make a situation where 4 precincts are grouped in one location, but you vote when you walk in there, you vote how when you register for anything, A, B, C, D, if your precinct's number 4, you go over there where that precinct number 4 is, and you cast your ballot there. You don't cast it in a big blob of all of these other ballots. You keep them separated. So we've got pretty good legislation and pretty good policy that makes sense. Let's put it that way.
Right. So how many bills do you foresee running this session?
Well,
we had 6 or 8 last session, and I think 1 got across the finish line. So wow. I think it's safe to say we're at probably 6 to 8 again.
Wow. That's a lot of bills to push for one topic, but I mean, we have to do it. We have to fix this.
Right.
And so I could probably tell you the ones, I won't, but I could probably tell you the ones who will be likely sponsors of the bill. And then of course the opposition, I'm assuming it's mostly the leadership that tries to shut this down based on what they're told about us being number 1.
Yeah, I think we've seen that with bills in all addressing all different issues. It usually does come down to that. But, that's one of the reasons why Kathy and I are so passionate about, coming on your program and hosting these trainings and speaking at groups, is the goal is to educate and equip, because Kathy and I can't be the only voices of Tennessee fair elections. This is a grassroots bottom up movement. And at some point, when it's the same two people talking about the issues, it's really easy for them to try to silence us.
Yep.
And put us in a corner, which is why it's so important for the voters across the state from all the different districts to really understand where we are and push back on that narrative, but be able to push back on it with facts. And that's what we want to provide. And we want to be very balanced. Like Kathy has said numerous times, we're doing some things very well in Tennessee, but there is room for improvement. And so when we're talking about this and we're equipping others to go, you talk to your legislators, you come up to Cordell Hall and lobby for some of these bills. When they start hearing from 100 people from their district,
Yep.
saying we want to return to in-person, we want to be in precincts, we don't want these vote centers, we want a secure hand-marked paper ballot, it's easy to ignore two
Yep.
people. It's not easy for them to ignore 100 people from their district.
Have you guys ever done like, I know you're not as big of an organization, but for instance, Tennessee Fire Association, we do a TFA day on the Hill. Has there been a fair elections day on the Hill?
Yeah, we actually did that this January, and we came with a copy of the U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights. We
okay.
delivered a copy, a beautiful color copy, to every office in person. We've followed up. And so we had other citizens there with us to make those visits. We followed up with multiple emails. We're asking legislators to pledge their support. And I think you have a slide that I shared with you that shows exactly who has pledged support. So we have a small sample of the 99 members of our state House of Representatives. And you can see for the Senate, we have
Even
two
smaller
senators. And then there are some even from the state executive committee that have agreed to pledge their support. So, and there's 66 members on the SEC. So I would love to be able to update these graphics and add more names. We've kind of flatlined on these names. Again, these are the names of the people that are open to listening to myself or Kathy. And with the help of some of our members, we've gotten some of those names on there. But at this point, it's going to come down to the people that live in the districts and communicating with their legislators. This is the Tennessee Bill of Rights, or I'm sorry, the U.S. Citizens Bill of Rights is what we want. This is the legislation. These are the policy changes we want in Tennessee. And ask their legislators to support that Bill of Rights, and then also support the policies that go with that and the legislation that we'll bring back. And we'll see that if they're not going to listen to their constituents and they're not going to pledge that support, then I guess the constituents have some tough decisions that they're going to need to make.
Yeah.
And I would also say this is a really good time going into a very big election year next year, where anybody who's going to be a candidate should be approached about supporting the U.S. Citizens Elections Bill of Rights. So we are also acknowledging those individuals on our social media as well.
Well, everybody needs to get their representative and their gubernatorial candidate of choice on the record for that. Well, hey, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate you coming on. Have you guys got any closing thoughts, anything you want to leave with the audience before we go?
Well, I just want to reiterate that training that we have on November 11th. It's a Tuesday. It's going to be on Zoom. Not that slide. I think it might be right after that. That one, yes. So you can learn, we're going to go through every article of the Bill of Rights, and we're going to explain to you exactly what we do have in Tennessee and what we're still missing, what we need to have in Tennessee. So it's going to be probably an hour-long training. You can register for that training on our website, right on the homepage, tnfairelections.org, and then you'll get the Zoom link, and you can share the registration, to share this graphic, invite people to go and register. Don't share your personal Zoom link, because then you'll have, a bunch of people with your name
Right.
attached to them. So don't do that. Everyone needs to register with their name and get their own Zoom link, and find out exactly how Tennessee does measure up. And then you are going to be able to go and have these conversations with your legislators, and just be very honest with them about what you expect to see in the next session in 2026. I'm sure Kathy probably has something very wise to wrap it all up with.
Well, the bottom line here is everything happens at the ballot box. Whether you're interested in education, healthcare, the Second Amendment, freedom of speech, if we don't secure our rights at the ballot box, we don't get that. We're seeing that across this country right now in real time, that there are some very important elections. And if we can be confident and we're bringing the people that should be voting out to the polls, and that that the policies that we do this are transparent, that is going to make a difference for everybody. A rising tide floats all boats. This is not what I would say an election integrity issue alone. This is about everything. Everything is a result of what happens at the ballot box with our government. And this is a citizen's opportunity to engage their government in a meaningful way and to learn how it works. And that is the simplest message there can be. Get involved, be a poll watcher, be a poll worker, get involved. We have a lot of ways to get involved, and then support people in Cordell Hall that are doing such a great job doing these very same things.
Well, hey, thanks again to both of you. Appreciate what you do. Definitely have you back on, especially once we get in session. And I hope we get this done. It's very important.
Very important. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank both of you. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Thanks again to Jonathan and Mary for their financial support from July through October. We really appreciate it. You guys are great. I cannot really tell you how much we appreciate it. It's made a huge difference. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter or our website, tninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Got a few announcements for you. The Stewart County GOP will host a meet and greet for Monty Fritz October 30th. That's this Thursday, 6:30 p.m. at the Stewart County Visitor Center. Be there. If you've not heard Monty speak, you want to hear him speak. The Raw Milk Summit, November 8th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Gorham Homestead. That's off 10584 New Cut Road in Bon Aqua. Speakers include Don Gorman, Dr. Ken Berry, Representative Michelle Renaud, Monty Fritz, Samantha Baker, and others. The event is free, but seating is limited, so you must reserve in advance. Click on the link in the show description. If you haven't heard ever hear of the Mises Institute? Know anything about them? Well, tonight we're going to hear from two people from Tennessee, a couple that are both involved with Mises, and are here to tell us all about it, along with their efforts on Defend the Guard legislation, including an audio of a legislator that just doesn't seem to care much about the Constitution. Next week, we'll have a roundtable discussion on the Islamic threat with Kathy Henners, David Baldwin, who's a retired FBI agent, and Shahram Hadian, a former Muslim who is now a pastor here in Tennessee. Don't miss it. It should be a great show. It will be probably about an hour and a half, so we may not have a second show. Hope you're going to join us. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.